there are some rare occasions you may see it. Back-end maneuver, that's the only one that has a different dimension where you have a 3x4, the rest of them 2.5x4. The sidewalk, where the push button before you get to the ramp element, ramp proximity limit, and that's a 2.5x4 dimension. The forms, a little different. So the forms for the turning space and the paved shoulders, which is this phone number, and different from the other inspection form. We won't go through the examples, but I'll just go walk you through them a little bit here quickly. Still, there are some common factor: the project name, construction year, contract number, highway number, mile point. These are similar to the other ramp inspection form. Similarly here. Here, then, you might start seeing some additional changes. Similarly for the ramp and the back-end maneuver and sidewalk, these stop forms are all the same. You may have a little bit difference, and really we'll talk about them. So the first thing you see on the form, the corner position, the button position, similarly to the previous configuration classification that Adam and Len talk about. You line up yourself in the mile increasing position, you go counterclockwise, and the first one is on the right is the number 1, 2, 3, 4 for the corner, and you will find those usually on the plan sheets, part of the new ODOT plan sheet for the ramps. You will find this information for the corner and the ramp position. So after we figure out the ramp, the corner position, you find the button position. The button is associated with the ramp that you're crossing. So if you have a ramp, if you have a button for ramp 1, so that would be button 1. If you have a button for ramp 2, that would be button 2. So the corner position here on the green, the button position are in orange. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2. If you're coming into the island, the cut-through island or the pork chop, if this is because this is corner number 2, so that it's the island is opposite to this one is 2A. As you're walking into the island, that would be ramp 1. If there's a button here, that would be button 1, 2, 3, and you go counterclockwise. If there is no push button at the crossing, reserve it. Don't skip it. Don't give it to the first one. So let's say here you don't have a push button for ramp 1. This will not turn into 1. That still would be number 2. So you reserve this one, because down the road they may install a new one. Indicator. If the indicator, what you check here, whether it's a beacon or signal. And the difference is the signal, of course, is part of signal setup. Beacon is only on the rapid reflective flashing beacons, the one that the middle block, they don't have the signal setup, they just flash as you push the button. So that's what mean B and S. The audible pedestrian signal, what you check here, you check two things: the audible pedestrian signal and the locator tone. So those, there sometimes you don't have the push button just because you are sometimes in the middle of a busy intersection in the city where the signals are pre-timed. So you may not have a push button there, but you will still be hearing the audible signal and the locator tone. So those are in the downtown area. So when you, as you're coming through, and if you hear speech message, what you should sound like this. Let me see if I. Oh, I'm sorry. So when you hear that, that is the speech message. That when you put the speech message, if you don't hear it, that means no, you don't hear that. The other type of the, I'm sorry, you have the speech message. You have two types. The N for nothing, SM for speech message, and PT is a progressive tone. So let's see here the progressive tone. So that's the progressive tone you will hear in that field. Now the locator tone is not one of the separate one. Locator tone, you hear it before you get to the signal. And the purpose of that, even before you push a button, if it's the push button is there, that to identify where the location of the push button for a person with visual disability. And the sound you'll hear there is this one.
Yeah, we're unable to hear the sounds that are coming.
You're not?
Yeah. Let's see. But it looks like Adam says if you go to the slide in the PowerPoint presentation, same sounds will be added.
Okay. Okay, launch slide. Show to play audible.
Or it could be something with the way that your audio is
oh,
sure.
Okay. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can. Okay, how about I do this? Are you able to hear it now? Are you able to hear it now?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, so probably it has to do with my setting here. My apology. I'll try to, in the break, when we take 15 minutes break, I'll try to switch to a different method and I'll come back and play those devices for you. This sounds good. Okay. Okay. And the signal head, we will have, you will see whether CD countdown, N is non, PIC is pictogram, X and for text, and you see the countdown. Quite often, actually most of the time, you push the button and you don't see immediately the countdown. The numbers start counting down when it's safe to cross. So you may see the hand, but not necessarily the countdown. So wait until you see the countdown number. Then you will see. If you see, then you put. If you see both, mostly, then you put the countdown. The pictogram, when you don't see the number, just this hand. And similarly, that don't walk, sometimes you see it happening before you number. So you will watch if there is any number it comes up, then you put the countdown. Button type, here you will have these three types. The first one is the ODOT standard type. And the second one, the edge, is literally look like an edge frame, two plates, and connected in the connect around the push button, so that's where the edge comes from, and or the other. So one standard edge frame or other. So if you see that, would be take a picture and you add it to the pictures on your phone. The arrow surface type, you have these options. The flush, which when the arrow on the plate is flush with the surface. Tactile, and the arrow is really embossed and it's really good touch, it's feel it. And then the vibrotactile, and those ones you see them, you don't see them all the signals, but you see them when they are as and installed. When you push the button, you're not going to feel it vibrating immediately. It vibrates only when it's safe to cross the street. Similarly, when the numbers comes out and when the speech comes out. So you push the button, you see that okay, it's still telling you wait until to cross the street. Once it starts vibrating, then it's safe to cross the street. And so if you want to inspect it and you check it out, push the button, wait until you see the countdown number on the other side. That means it start vibrating. That means it's safe to cross the street. Clear space detail. The clear space is again depending on the type of the clears. If it's a shoulder versus a paving shoulder, is a back end maneuver, or the other 5 types we discussed. So for this one here, on this form we have the back end maneuver, ramp run, and sidewalk. And what you have these measures to check against the reach, range, height, width for these reach, range, and height. These are for the push buttons. The width, length, and slope, and those are for the clear space and the slope of the road. That just because of the intersection type dictates some of the measurements here. So the clear space type, we have this option we discussed earlier, a paved shoulder, and they are on Exhibit C of the attachment number 4. So if we go back to attachment number 4, you will see these are the inspection form, and you'll see them here, and the back here there's Exhibit C, and shows you the more details of each one of them. The clear space, again, depending on the which configuration, you select the configuration. As for the next one is the reach range. The reach range, the max is 0.83, which equals to 10 inches, but you record it to 0 in the tenth of a foot. And that reach range is from the obstruction to the obstruction to the button. So if you have a curb here, then that would be where you measured from, not from the curb, from the bottom of the curb, from where that wheelchair could get to. Notice a couple things here. The push button you need a foot from the back of the clear space to this 2 feet, and that leaves us with 1 feet about here, so that the push button need to be in the middle of the 2 feet area here for the clear space. Otherwise, it may jeopardize the stability of the person in the wheelchair. The height, 3.5 feet to 4, and then again, this would be good to demonstrate the reach. So if you have, you put your plumb bob from here, you lower it down, and you measure. This would be your reach. And if you have a curb here, and then you put your plumb bob right from here, and you measure horizontal distance, that would get you the reach. But for this one, we're talking about the height, which would be 3.5 to 4.
Ну посмотри, я не знаю, если что, то
Где вот
доедешь.
стрелочка стоит, то до этого
So
места, да?
this is an example of a push button clear space, where in this case on the Impero ramp, the clear space is the turning space. And these are the criteria, which is similar to for the clear space, a slope similar to the turning space. And except here, when you're looking at the width and the length, you compare them for the clear space, you compare them to the clear space dimension, not for the turning space. Any questions? Let me check my... functional conditions, similar to the previous one. If there's any functional condition if any one of these functional criteria is not passing, this would turn into fail. Otherwise, it will, P, otherwise it would be good. Okay, I'm still there. I'm checking myself, making sure that I did not lose you. Okay. Requirement summary for the push buttons. Horizontal reach is 0.83. Clear space should be 2.5 by 4, except for the back-in maneuver is 3 by 4. Push button height, 3.5 to 4. That's simple. Okay, the TPAR, temporary pedestrian access ramp. Part of the traffic control submittal, the contractor need to submit a TPAR to the engineer. And the TPAR would include the detour for the pedestrian when the contractor closing that specific ramp and working on. So the temporary there may be temporary ramps needed part of the TPAR because you're closing that ramp. And then the temporary ramps, including the T-part, must meet the same geometry as the permanent curb ramps. Note that temporary pedestrian route must have the same or better than existing criteria of the current before you removing or constructing that ramp. I'll stop by here for a sec. Lindsay would have a poll. Lindsay?
Oh, actually, the poll is not going to be until a little bit later, slide 259.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put myself here. Okay.
No worries, we'll check back in then.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we'll be moving now to the construction document. For this section, I will be covering from the presentation, and I will be referencing the ODOT spec book. If you have a copy of it, it will be handy there. If not, I have it. I will switch to it as a PDF document. Also, I will be referencing the third document, which is special provision, which usually comes part of the construction document. The main document that every inspector know and every contractor know is the ODOT spec, ODOT standard specification for construction. Currently, we are on 2018. They get updated every 3 years, and we are working now, and ODOT's working on the 2021 now. So when do you know which spec applies to your project? Because most of the time, as designer, you're preparing the plans on 2018. May roll into, by the time you put to bid, by the time it goes to construction contractor, maybe in the construction year where the new specs come, so there may be some confusion which one applies to what. So that I'll show you where you find this information, and then we'll talk a little bit about where to find what's in the specs. Usually in the specs there is section 100, which is administrative part, different from the technical part. So for typical ODOT projects, STIP project and others, all the Oregon this specs, which includes 100 and plus other 200 and higher, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The STIP project applies all to the ODOT specs. For projects that bid on ORPN, the 100 section would be part of the Oregon to 2012 general condition, not the ODOT specs in the black book that you have. So where to find which spec applies to your project? Basically, if you go to your here's an example of an ODOT project. So this is an ODOT project that was bid, and here's a contract number. So if you look into the first, and you scroll into that contract, you'll find that applicable in the special provision in the contract. You'll page where it says work to be done, a special provision, and you will find applicable specifications. And here it says clearly the specification applied for this project is the 2018. And it says all section of 100 apply. So that's your answer. If you have a project you don't know which specs, you need to flip to this one, and you just put this page, part of your contract, and we'll find it. Now, the Oregon standard specification that the black book you have now, the 2018, and it will come the 2020 soon, it's broken into sections. This section is 100, unique, and then if you come on the material, different. So the rest of them, which we call them technical sections, and they are described the technical specs, how to do things. And we'll get a little bit in details here. The general requirement, the 100, is very important, and I suggest every inspector and contractor read it. It describes the work, roles, and responsibility of the inspector and contractors in the field, how to administer the contract. Well, actually, it starts from all the way before the bid, when the contractor what need to do to submit the bid and communication with ODOT and so forth. it goes through the bid, goes through the award, then after that it goes into more specifically how to administer the contract once you award it, how you get change order, how you get time requests and so forth, dispute and claim and so forth. So this is a very important section. I suggest everybody read it. After that, you have these 200, 300 and so forth. These numbering is not random. They are put in a way that reflects you. Typically, the work happens in the field. So you start usually with temporary work. If you have temporary traffic control, temporary erosion control, you will see them in the 200. The 300, you will see some of the road work, earth X, embankments, and so forth, and you continue this work, and then you start your base, and then you wearing surface as you're going up, and then you start in safety, your permanent traffic control and safety, and so forth. And this section here, the material that you need to, every one section of this will reference material included in the tech center, in the tech section. And this section here tells you about the material specs that were expected from the contractor to put in place. Now, every section, let's say from 200 to the 2000, they're broken into these subsections. And similarly, when you modify, when the designer modify or alter or add new spec, the special provision is not in the specs, then they have to also follow this structure. So the subsection here, 00 to 09, the description of the work, scope of the work, what's need to be done in the field. 10 to 19, the material, and I referred to that a little bit ago. You need concrete, the concrete needs then commercial concrete. Then when you turn to the commercial concrete section and the material, and you find the specs for the compression strength and so forth, all that material you added. Any additive you add, that's additive. There's a specs and what's accepted for ODOT, and that is listed in the material section. Equipment, say if you are doing ADA ramp, and we'll find out to tell you about the equipment, you're going to measure those to the levels and so forth. If you're doing paving, they will probably listed the number of the rollers, the rolls specs, the joule, the vibratory rolls, the static rolls, and so forth. That comes in the equipment. Labor, if there are any specific certification for the labors need to happen, and others, you will find them into this section 39 and so forth, all the way through. Most importantly here, measurements and payment, that's where the designer and the inspector and the contractor, the designer tells, okay, this is the square foot each, yard, whatever, ton, lump sum, that in the measurement and payment and how you pay it, and what's the item for it. Now we listed a few things already. We talked about the specs, we talked about plans, we talked about standard drawing during the training today, and quite often there may be apparent discrepancies between these documents, so which one takes precedence over the other, and here is the hierarchy. And where do you find it? It's in section 150.10. I go back to section 150, the ODOT spec, so I downloaded it here. So if I go to ODOT section 150.10, if you open to page, if you're in the black book, on the paper copy, you open to page 36. If you're on a PDF document, you go to page 94. And section 150.10, it lists for you here, it's its order of precedence. So you see the 100 section talks about that. And it tells you here the special provisions takes precedence over the ODOT standard specification, the reviewed and accepted stamped working drawing, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, takes over the standard drawings that we listed and discussed over the day, and notes on drawings, on the plans, shall take precedence over drawing details. So all of that listed, all this precedence, order of precedence, the section 150.10a. Notice here again, the project plans takes over precedence over the standard drawing. So if you notice that standard drawing, the inspection form slopes are, let's say, 8.3 and 2% are the max. But if the plan is telling you to do the running slope, 6%. There is no need to build it to 8.3 unless you have to, unless you cannot, unless the field condition dictate you. And we'll talk about how to get there. Just we don't go automatically to the max slope. We go with the plan's drawing because that's what the governs here. It takes precedence over the standard drawing. So before you look in the plans and the contract, you need to be aware of a couple of things. ODOT, when put at most of the agencies too, when they put project to bid, they would be noted as bidding plans. And the specs, the contractual document, the special provision, the specs that we talked about, they are a blue color. So when you see these two, those are during the bidding process. So the bidding process usually 3 to 4 weeks. And during this bidding process, usually contractors submit requests or with questions and so forth. And the agency and the regime of record, they respond to those and they may add addendum. And this addendum may alter these plans and specs. So once you have that happen, then you will have, once it's all done, they will be combined all in one document, and it's called contract plan. And then you will have a contract number. So in the field, if you are looking at inspecting something, making sure you're inspecting from the contract plan, not from the bidding plan. And the contract will be now brown. So the differentiation between the brown and blue is not accidental. So if you are in the field, if you are checking something from the blue, you may not have the latest information. And you differentiate that also because now you have a contract number and you have the EA number, you have a contract number, and you have a contractor here. So that means you have a And the reason I'm saying this, quite often, the prime gives us to sub some of the work, the sub during the bid to get collect quotes. And as a sub, make sure you get the latest and greatest from the prime, not just the copy that you received during the bidding process. So what are special provisions? Special provisions are the one that I just mentioned here. So as a designer, they reference the specification for every bid item. Everything or that's put in the plans, they would have quantities and they have a bid item, and that bid item correspond to the specs or that construction specification. And if that construction item is altered or changed, then ODOT would be, the designer would be writing a special provision. And ODOT have on their website, if you Google ODOT standard, special provision boilerplate, you have boilerplate for all the bid items that may be altered. And then there's way you could alter it as a designer. Also, part of the contract document, there is what's called the schedule of item, or that's where the contractor, that's where the designer put their quantities. And first, they put how you measure it, the quantities. The contractor then come back and fill their unit price, and that would be the total cost. For these scheduled quantities, you will notice here. Let's move on here. They have numbers. Each bid item, which had numbers next to it. There's this number here. First of all, sub number. It's for cost trending track for ODOT. Doesn't necessarily mean a lot for the inspector and the contractor in the field. What's important is this number here. This number here. These numbers do correspond with the standard specification, the black book, or the one we just talked about. The section 0470 that correspond to the two things: the special provision in your contract and is the specification in the black book. If the special provision did not alter that. So if you open to section 470, you will find something, most likely something to inlet. Concrete, if you go to section 490, it's about manhole and so forth. So ODOT, also similar to the specs, had hierarchy for the numbering system and which comes first and so forth. The the plan drawing had also order. So the first thing you see the title sheet, typical section details, traffic control, and so forth. And the last thing you see here is standard drawing. In between here, there is an index sheet, and the index sheet usually that lists all the standard drawing that applies to your project here. So make sure you're looking at this one because we're referencing them too. The details of what you see, the plans, detail for the ADA ramps, and you see all the information now, or that we don't have, and online we're not passing you a sample of plan set. But in the plan set, current plan set, if you see a plan sheet for the ADA ramp, so you will see the part of the sheet you'll see here, so the drawing and the ramps detail. You will find a table here which shows ramps, elevation, slopes, ramp number, and you will see here the ramp number, the LRM number, the corner number, and so design exception, and so forth. So the detail sheet, once you open it, you'll find for the ADA ramp have all the ADA information needed to put in the inspection form. So these information insert here in the plan sheets would be crucial to the inspector and the designer and the contractor to follow. So when they put the inspection form, because it's all built on this one here. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to the section 759 specifically, and this section is where the ADA ramps, the commercial concrete, the ADA ramp that the drawing plans and what's needed, what's expected from the contractor. So here I will be flipping back and forth between the presentation and the ODOT standard specification and the sample of the potential concrete that contract that you will see in the field. So going back to the so when we go to section 759, you will find, I'll go quickly here first of all, the skeleton of it. You talked about how every section is broken into subsection. So you will see here the scope, the 00, the 02, the submittal. We come back down to the later on the material and so forth. So the first thing you will see here in the submittals, current ODOT spec, if you open to, and that will be on the black book on page 843. The black book on the paper copy will be page 785. In the PDF, if you have a PDF, it will be page 843 of the PDF. So you look at the the submittals they have. First two of them here, A and B, and we'll look in the special provision now. There's a third submittal. The first submittal here is important, working drawing. So notice the importance of this. ODOT is expecting from the contractor, before the pre-placement conference, submit 6 copies of unstamped working drawing according to section 150.35 for all sidewalk ramp. Okay, how many 6? And what's in those 6 copies? What do they include? They include field verifications of each ramp location, dimension, grade necessary to demonstrate compliance with standard drawing and plans. So the contractor, you got your plans drawing that you bid on. Then before the pre-placement of the ramp, which means way before, and we'll come back and see when is that happening. You need to take this drawing and go to the field and verify that you can build them according to the drawing. If you cannot build them to the according to the drawing, then you need to notify the engineer of any deficiency or non-compliance with the standard drawing or the plans. So that's your opportunity for the contractor to and say, hey, I could either build it or if I can't build it, why and how I can build it. Then the engineer will provide additional or modified plan as needed. So if the contractor said, I can't build slope 6% here, it has to be 8.1 or something, then that's your time to go back and tell the engineer that so I can build this. And then this unstamped drawing, once reviewed and accepted or modified, by the engineer, resident engineer, then they become the plans that or the drawings that you will be inspected on. What we all have been seeing different level of effort put on this plan. Some contractor take the plan drawings and redline them, and they say, okay, instead of slope 3.1, I make it 3.5, or some redlining of the plans drawings. Some other contractors sending surveyor seam and doing CAD and submitting them to ODOT depending on complexity of this plan drawings. But that is the opportunity that, first of all, it's an expected submittal. That's the first thing you need to submit to the contractor. And when do you need to submit those? And the sidewalk ramp plan, it's a 21-day before the sidewalk ramp is scheduled to begin, not on the day or day before the removal. It's just they need to have ample time to have any challenges in it brought to the engineer and discussed between the contractor and inspectors, and we all reach the conclusion before you start removal stuff. Here, do not begin any sidewalk ramp before plan completing and has been approved. If they are not approved, you're taking a risk to the contractor to do this on your own. And then the engineers need to be well aware of it. So I think one of the questions said, hey, what if when the design exception can be offered and so forth? I know that the previous training said they are potentially working on expedited fast process for design exception in construction field, just in case the ramps, the plans did not meet the field. So contractor, if they find that, yeah, I can't do it, I need a design exception, or that working on a process to make sure this during the construction is a fast approach so they don't hold the construction work. Now, and we talked about 2 submittal, the specs now had a 3rd submittal. So if we go back to the 3rd submittal in the specs, I'm sorry here, just take a second to say what my drawings here, my scribbles, and that's what it said. If we go back to in the specs, go back to this one here. So you notice this other special provision, that's part of the contract. It says 75902C. So whenever you see the specs, if the special provision modifying the specs, and it will say add or modify or something. So in this case, you're saying add the following subsection. So we have a new submittal. ADA certification for all contractors. For all supervisory personnel who will directly supervise the curb work, submit names, telephone numbers, and copies of all that ADA certification for contractor 10 calendar days before the pre-con conference, so way early on. So that's part of this training that's happening. Contractor need to get certified and to get those certified people to be in the field and doing the work. And that we will see that part of the pre-placement conference. So since I'm on this page here, notice in the special provision saying all supervisory personnel who have an active ODOT ADA certification contractor and will directly supervise must attend the pre-placement conference. If I go back now to the presentation, making sure I covered things. So we have 75902, the required submittal. We talked about the drawings, we talked about the sample plans, and we talked about the certification that were added into part of the special provision. So these are already in the specs, and the special provision now is adding additional. Okay, so now the pre-placement conference. I'm going to go back to the standard specification, and we go to the pre-placement conference. Before any sidewalk ramp work, meet the contractor supervisory personnel, quality control manager, sidewalk ramp subcontractor supervisory personnel at an agreed upon time. And so who's doing the work? Not necessarily the prime. If you have a sub doing the work, that sub person need to be there, and that should be already certified. So remember 75903, we have special provision altering that called the certified personnel who will be directly supervising the work need to be attending this pre-placement conference. And now the 759.22, the level requirement. So if I go back to the spec, this is the spec side. It doesn't have 759.22 equipment, so it's been added part of the contract. So if I go to the contract here, we'll find 759.22. Smart level slope will be verified with the use of 24-inch smart tool, and they're talking about these two samples. Now, I want to share with you, this is the special provision that the inspector, the designers work off. So this was here, 759 miscellaneous concrete. So the designers start working on this. And here is talk about the required submittals, the 21-day, the ADA certification, the pre-placement conference, who should be attending it, and talks even about the 759.12 for the truncated dome that's needed from QPL, yellow color, and the 22 of the smart level, and the tools need to be used. And it mentions about some additional things here, the expansion joints, where you put them, the earthworks. So you will see all of this into the turn into contract and about the bid item. So I just downloaded this morning. This is the ODOT special provision 759, which you could design or utilize to modify, and eventually it ended up to be turned into this document that we just here. Just come up in a second here. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. So we talked about the pre-placement conference, the smart level. Now 759.46. So I'm going to go back to the ODOT specs, because this is it's already there. 759.46. It was a 759.46. Let's see. Yeah, 46. So while it's loading, I'll start talking about. So part of the specs, it says the contractor need to verify those forms before they before pouring concrete, and it's expected to verify the forms as you're moving during the. I'm sorry, let me go back here. Here we go. Notice here where it says construct structure between suitable forms, and before placing the concrete, contractor expect to verify that forms are correctly positioned to produce sidewalk ramps with proper slope and dimensions. Place concrete according to section 440. So when you contractor, most likely you're not forming one ramp and pouring in the same time, same day, or the next day. You're probably most likely forming 10, 15 ramps until you get enough quantity, then you come back and start pouring. So the forms, if you formed one ramp 2 days ago, done 3 days ago, it's an active construction zone. People may step on those forms, rain and other may alter this form, so make sure you go back and verify them the day before the pour or the same day when you pour, making sure your forms are done correctly, because the story up to the forms is it's elaborate. You went in the field, you verified that you have the plans, you built them according to the plan, or you modified them, and the engineer gave you the okay to modify them. You prepared yourself to pour the form. You verified them you verified them the first day, but then on the day of the pouring is very important to go back and verify them again, because that's one of your one step before your last chance to get them done correctly. At the end of the day, so the way I usually talk about this section, I would say it's a story or a communication plan or expectation, or starting to tell us about for the contractor, hey, what I expect from you. You submit this, check the plans. Go to the field, verify. So give me your plan, contractor, how you're going to be build it, if it meets the plan or not. Give it to me 21 days before. Don't give me in the day before the pour. Take your time. Let's talk about it, and let's talk at the pre-placement conference with the right people who are certified. How we could be building these ramps. We're going to put the grade break. There's the gaps. Who's going to be there, so forth. That's all been discussed in the pre-placement conference. Or they're telling us what to do with this, what tools we're going to use. We all agreed upon, and telling us, hey, here's what the expectation about verifying the form. At the end of the day, if it fails, telling the contractor it's your own cost to replace it, because we're trying to work with the. What I was trying to tell the contractor, we're trying to work with you all the way through to make sure at the end of the day, if all this passed, the only thing is failed then between the pouring and the finishing, that where it fails, and that would be the contractor's responsibility to replace it. So we talked about in every section, they have measurement and payment, and one of the things new things on the 759, the retrofit, it was there, that is gone. But there's this bid item in the extra for a new sidewalk. So let me go back to the specs. Let's see, 759. Here we go. N says, which is the extra, and you will see that part of the here, extra for sidewalk ramps. So for each ramp you have on the plans, contractor, inspector, you will have one. So if you have a 21 ramp, you will have a 21 under extra, you will have a 21. And what does that include, and what was included in the specs, and how that? I'm sorry for that. So that was the work required to construct new ramp, sidewalk, and concrete sidewalk, and payment for the area of sidewalk will be made under concrete walk sidewalk bid item. So let's go see what's that into the specs. So under specs is with what you find into your contract, 759.90, it says payment, and what it's saying, replace pay item N with this new item. So it's adding to us new special provision, and it's saying includes the work, additional work required for construct curb ramp, replace an existing ramp. And when replacing an existing ramp, retrofitting existing ramp, also that we use. And then saying also add no separate additional payment will be made for providing supervisor personnel or get the certification. So there is this item here to cover some extra work that the contractor is expected to have. But also if I go back to the specs here, if we read the specs existing at the bottom, no separate or additional payment will be made for sidewalk ramp, working drawing, sidewalk, ramp plan, replacement conference, concrete form verification. So there will be no extra. That would be, so the contractor most likely will have this cost included in the extra bid item. Before I leave this section here, notice a couple things. The earthwork, not all the contract, if I go back to the special provision I'm sorry, go back here, see if I can get up with it. The boilerplate provision in the section 759, earthworks, remove and dispose of existing concrete sidewalk curb ramp that are scheduled approval according to section 310. There is no mention of earth X and others. So if I go back to the when earthwork is included as separate pay item, sorry. If it's telling me if it's, sorry for that, here we go. Tell me When earthwork is included as separate pay item, payment will be made according to section 339. The next line underneath it, when earthwork is not included as separate pay item, no separate or additional payment will be made for earthworks. So pay attention, contractor, inspector, look at your plan if there's any extra payment for the earthwork or not, and then that would be how it would be paid. Last here, typical, what we've been seeing, and we'll talk about that in the next section, the top 10 for failed ramps. Quite a bit of failure happening during the finishing, not during the form, not during what the contractor submitting plan drawing or not able to do it. There's just minor inconsistency during the finish form. So contractors who have been checking forms on a wet concrete as they're moving, because that's a crucial part and that's an important part here. So that would take care of this section here. Before I leave the construction section, construction spec section, I want to see if anybody had any questions for me, and let me know so I can answer. I'll give you here a couple minutes. Any question? Okay. I'll move on to the standard drawings that covers the standards, the ADA curb ramps. I know we've been sprinkling them all across the inspection form. There have been a lot of those inspection forms criteria in the training mentioned the standard drawing, so we will talk about them here. So 7, I'll go a little bit of each one of them. What I'll do actually, it's in your attachment number 3. I'm going to go to attachment number 3 and walk you through. So 710 for islands. So we start from top left corner here. That's where the special provisions, the standard drawing saying, hey, notice the 6 foot. I think you notice that part of the form, making sure you have a 6 foot, and that's making sure you have 2 foot truncated dome and another 2 feet minimal in between. And I think Adam talked about that earlier today. And notice and here it said that in note number 7. Note number 7. So you just follow the instructions on the notes here. So note number 6, detectable warning surface shall be separated by 2 foot minimum length of walkway without detectable warning. Where no curb, the warning surface shall be placed at the edge of the roadway. And that happens sometimes when you have an asphalt, when you don't have curb, so you put the truncated dome at the edge of, if there is no curb, you put at the edge of the asphalt. Notice here the width is 5 feet, and that's a difference also from the clear width on the island for the forms. They are not 4. If you remember, the clear width on the other that we talked about everywhere else on the ramp are the 4 feet. When you're looking at the cut through island, they're 5. And you will find that on the form. Again, you'll find it here one more time. That's what you're looking at. Other things to pay attention to is note number 8. Find it here somewhere. And where you put this truncated dome and where you finish them is where you expect them is along state highway curb angle is required at curb ramps if you have them. If they are, you can do them. Okay, so we have, this is the first standard. The second one, I think Adam talked about this also lengthily, so I'll just cover a little bit here. What's new? This is a new RD 722. It just happened while we were doing discussion about the training, and I think Jaime felt that the transition panel need a little bit more attention, so they worked on this detail. So the detail here, you notice the the transition panel. Again, the purpose of transition panel is to correct when you're building an ADA ramp connecting to an existing sidewalk that does not meet a standard, the cross slope doesn't meet the standard, then you will need to have somehow connect a new ramp that meeting to a sidewalk doesn't meet. So, and you don't do that by the ramp, because if you think about it, the ramp, the curb ramp proximity, the elements are the ramps running to the turn space, and the turn space comes to the, if it's a combo or others, and then comes to the running ramps and takes you, the curb takes you out. You can't warp the ramps. The ramp should have constantly cross a slope less than 2%. So where do you do the correction of the slope? You do them in the transition panel. In the transition panel, notice here, section AA. So this is a transition panel here. Let me take my marker. So so this is a transition panel. If you look at section AA, if you look at it over here, and you will see X2 and X1 should equal. So the purpose of this not to correct the grade, rather just to correct the cross slope. So you need to match the grade, so you don't have multiple breaks between the existing sidewalk and the transition panel. The transition panel is greater than a guideline, about 6 feet or a little over the 6 feet. If you look at the rate for the cross slope changes, warp, like to correct from the existing sidewalk to the new one, is 0.5% per foot. So that about the transition panel. Also, there here in this same standard drawing, some discussion about the joint detail. So it wasn't in the standard drawing clear, I guess, for some. So the shouldn't be more than 1/2 inch wide for the expansion joint, and for a dummy joint, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, or contraction joints. And the radiuses here is quite clear: 1/4 inch radius, 1/4 inch radius, so that alleviates the 1/2 inch gap that sometimes you see in the ramps. So what note 6 telling us, construction joint 15 feet minimum and so forth. I think that's just typical. Usually we find them. Okay. The next standard drawing, 754, and this is the end of walk standard drawing. Let's start here. When the slope of the curb ramp is greater than 5%, they expect a minimum landing 4.5 by 4.5 for the design, and then 1.5% max slope. So if we come back here, I want to also point out a couple of things. Here's the end of the walk ramp. So the curb ramp coming to this is when you have more than 5% curb ramp slope. You're coming from the ramp where usually on the sidewalk the slope of you shed the water into the road. So into this area you need to come back where there's no curb, so you will be taking the water away from the road into the shoulder, so that when you reverse the slope, you notice this cross slope reversal here. And that's the area where you have, if it's more than, if the slope more than 5%, you need a 4.5 by 4.5, and then you transition back to the paved shoulder. Cross slope, and different. Here's where, if you're assuming you have whatever dry sidewalk or transition panel as required as needed, the difference here, if you have slope less than 5%, you come back and the slope here match the grade of the roadway. Here you come back to the slope 1.5. If it's more than If it's between 5.5 and 7.5, because you cannot go more than 7.5, then you need to go the 1.5% slope. The other thing on the end of walk standard is the truncated dome. Omit the 2-foot truncated dome warning surface unless you're crossing. So if the truncated dome is the pedestrian coming here to continue this way, or if this way is just continue shoulder, then you don't need the truncated dome. If you are, if we have a crosswalk here, and the pedestrian coming here, wheelchair turning, moving, then we need to have a truncated dome. $7.55 perpendicular ramp. Detectable warning surface shall be the width of the curb ramp, and the curb ramp width greater than 1.5. Let's go back to general note number 5 for the detectable warning. Again, we'll look at the detectable warning standard drawing here shortly. But detectable warning at 2 foot should be the depth of 2 feet. And general note number 12, where you have this on curb anglers are expected. But I do want to point out the graded brakes at the top, the bottom of the curb ramp shall be perpendicular to the direction of the ramp. And I think this one of the slide that Landon talked about and showed us an example where it failed. Graded brake shall not be permitted on the surface of the ramp and turning space. Note number 10, check the gutter flood depth at the curve of the ramp to assure the design flood does not overtop the back of the sidewalk at curb ramp. Place inlet on the upstream if you have to. So that's assurance that, hey, we don't want water to pond or cause issues, because after we build all this ramp and we spend a lot of time to make it compliant, but unfortunately, if we add more water, if we find ourselves with a pond or pool of water there, it's not accessible, in the winter it freezes and becomes a safety issue. 756. Here a couple things to mention. First of all, I think we talked about the 3-inch exposure. Also notice that the 3-inch exposure coming also, you need to have a minimum of a 12-inch horizontal distance. And if you look at general note 9, where it talks here, when 2 curb ramps are immediately adjacent, as option B and C, the flares they may be adjacent with the flare, then we need to have a 3-inch exposure around between these 2 flares. And that's where you find it on this 12-inch minimum horizontal difference, and 3-inch will be the vertical curb clearance you need to see. And that is in 756. There's some discussion quite a bit, and we'll talk about that into the top 10 reason to fail, that these failed ramps, the drop-off and the traversable, not traversable flares. So currently, if you have any configuration like this, you cannot have here brick or anything. Notice it is landscaped buffer strip, and that's what makes it soft. That would be soft surface. So that would differentiate for the person with visual disability that there is it's not safe to come over here. Because if we see there is a concrete or a brick, and then you see this configuration of curb ramp, then that will constitute a drop-off, and that will be a failed ramp. So buffer strip. So make sure, and what type of buffer strip? That's not a hard surface, that would be landscape surface, and that is what we note 7 here. Return curb may be provided in lieu of flare slope only if protected from traverse travel by landscaping. So that is clear here. It's in the standard drawing. Return curb shall not reduce the width of approaching sidewalk. Of course, that's expected. The next one, slide 757. A few things to point out to here. The one on striping. Remember, there's a striping criteria and the conditions of the ramp. And if you look here, there is in the 4x4, it's a dotted line. You're going to find it all on all of these. I highlighted them here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's expected to see a clear space of striping 4x4. So that's one of the things to note out here. The other one, feet between ramp or between driveway and ramp, it needs to be a minimum of 5 feet from the back, not from the front. And what else here too? I think those are the things to highlight in addition to what we highlighted earlier in the previous standard drawing. Okay, and detectable warning surface, detail placement location. I think Landon talked about this here. So the radius, first of all, you should not have more than 2 inch here, otherwise it will fail. ODOT engineers looked at some drawings and they found out that unless you have less than 15 feet radius, you're not going to have this. You're not going to have a chance. You're not going to have a position where you find more than 2 inch. So the 15 feet radius would allow you to put the truncated dome on both sides and without having this 2 inch gap here. And so most of ODOT highway typically have more than 15 radius. So you may find this in smaller local agencies project and so forth, but if you find them on ODOT, you will have at the time to talk to the engineer. They're all radial truncated dome, so the 2 inch is not acceptable gap, 2 inch gap. And here's repetition what we talked in the cut through island. You need to have 2 feet minimum between the truncated dome and okay. And what else we talk about here? All right, so then note number 3, the 2 inch gap, where you find it if you want to be paying attention to it in standard drawing, which is note 3, a gap of up to 2 inches on each side of the warning surface is permitted, measured at the landing corner of the detectable warning surface panel. Okay, detectable warning surface shall be placed at the back of the curb with a 2 foot minimum width, and detectable surface warning may be radial or rectangular. Detectable warning surface may be cut to meet necessary shape as shown in the plan. Color is yellow. Some other agency may choose otherwise, but for ODOT project is yellow unless you have otherwise in the plans telling you. Remember, those are the standard drawing. The plans have higher precedence, so it may take override if there are things in the plan different from here. Standard drawing 759, and a little bit more about the truncated dome. Go back here. In repetition of the detectable warning shall extend the full width of the curb ramp. The 2 inch gap, not in the middle, should be maybe on the edges, not in the middle. It should be all the way through, and maybe detectable warning may be cut to meet necessary shape as in the plan. And here's some additional about where you shall not be used at the end of the sidewalk if there is transition, if there is no crosswalk, and referencing us back to the standard drawing or the driveway on this driveway and the parking lot. Grade brakes at the top of the bottom of the curb ramp shall be perpendicular to the direction of the curb ramp. Grade brakes shall not be permitted on the surface. One more reminder. These directional curb, talked about them earlier. I think Adam and Landon talked about them. This slope here, less than 5%. From previous training, we learned 5% fails, 4.9 passes. So pay attention. It's not less or equal. It's less than. So if it's less than, if it's 5%, it's failing for the trunk, for the slope. Or this slope we're talking about, this should be less than 5%. So if I take my drawing, you don't see less or equal, it's less than. Okay, we talked about the push buttons and where you find the standard or the standard push buttons. So the drawing, the dimensions, the here's the 3.5 to 4, 3 feet 6 inches to 4, where you measure it, and some additional details. That's covered the standard drawing. So I went through attachment number 3. And this is the ODOT standard push button. And okay, so this is typical ODOT drawing we talked about. I mentioned earlier, try to sketch it. You will find a good design. You will find the profile of the flow line to make sure you don't have ponding. It will give you the ramp, each ramp, give you ramp 1, 2, 3, the turning space, give you the slope. And if you have, in this case, 2 ramps, so ramp 1, ramp 2, I'm sorry, let me take this back. No, if you have on one ramp, for each ramp, you may have ramp 1, ramp 2, ramp 3, depending on the type of the ramp. Then this is where this is where the engineers put them, and that's where the inspector and the contractor try to build it from. And you will find if there's here the LRM number, the mile point number, the corner position, and if there's any design exception, you will find it here. And in the field, if you see a design exception, that means the resident engineer had that design exception, and the inspector and the contractor should have that, because it tells them what value in the design of the ramps are changed. And most likely, if you come back here, if you see remember the engineer designed, let's say, cross slope to 1.5%. If they're designing, if you see here 1.7%, that means there's a design exception. You look for that. If you see 2%, 2.1%, 2 or to 1%, that means there's a design exception. You look for that. Similarly, designers design to 7.3%. Contractor have a tolerance up to 8.5%. No, I'm sorry, take this back. 7.5 and 8.3. 7.5 and 8.3%. So if you see here 7.6, that means there's a design exception, and then you find that into. So that's a QQ if there's a design exception. If you see numbers here, and there's a design exception, could be for dimensions too, not only for the slope. So remember, the designer designed for 4.5 with the standard drawing. Remember the turning design 4.5 by 4.5 for turning space. The contractor could go up to 4 by 4 for if there's a good reason for it. And then if you see in the design 4, that means there most likely design exception. So just pay attention to that. But that's a typical a plan sheet, you will see an ODOT plans. They are, don't confuse, I think Adam talked about it earlier in the very beginning of the morning. You may sign here pilot project, and pilot project, they have different configuration and different information, type of information, or that coming up with certain pilot project to expedite the design and the delivery process of this projects. Okay, so for technical resources, ODOT Engineering for Accessibility webpage, you have it on your links. It's a very good link to have a lot of information. That where you download the inspection forms, a lot of the design element and other things, you find it there. For technical support for ODOT roadway engineers, ODOT have ADA group engineers, Sandra and Heidi. If you have a question, you can reach out to them. Don't call them or email them on the day of the pour. They're not going to be able to respond to you in any way that you could do it. If you have questions or anything from the engineer or the contractor or the designers, I would suggest you reach out to them during the submittal of the drawings. You have 21 days. If the contractor came back and said, "Hey, I can't build this bigger plan because the signal post right here. How can I suggest I can do this way?" That's a time discussion, and that's the time if you come back to engineer of record, and that's the time when you could reach out to Sandra and Heidi. Technical resources, additional technical resources, ODOT standard drawing that we just looked at. You'll find them in this link. ODOT Engineering for Accessibility, again, you find it here. And there is a YouTube video for smart tool level calibration, and that could be, you could see on the internet to refresh your memory if you don't do it as often. That's end of this section. Before we do the poll, if you have any questions, I think Lindsay had a poll to take. Lindsay?
Yep, that's right. I'm gonna get into presentation mode here. Just 1 second, I'm setting it up here.
Sure. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay. Poll should be live. Can you guys see that? See the responses coming in? Looks like we've got about 6 people left to respond, so we'll give you about 30 more seconds to submit your answer. All right, closing. Riyadh, are you able to see the results now?
Yes, I see the results. It seemed like I wasn't a great teacher. Should be between 3.5 by 4. There's a couple folks that in between, or a few folks came up between 3.5. 3.5 was the old criteria. It changed to 3.5 by 4. Between 3.5 by 4. That's the correct answer. Okay.
Right.
So
Riyadh, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's take 10, 15 minutes of break. It's 2:54. Let's come back at, I know it won't take me 2 hours to finish the next part of the presentation. So we'll finish early. If you have few questions after that, you could ask me. But let's now take a break, come back at 3:10. 3:10 we will start. Thank you.